Should be good now. So welcome everybody, the last session for today. My pleasure to shoot you out through the door, right to the closing keynote. If I overrun, you need to interrupt me to get to Brian, so that's the trick for you to come out promptly in time. For those who don't know, I'm Thorsten from Germany. I'm doing BriForum for a long time right now, and this time I brought with me something that I called the Citrix mobility stack. And I felt over the last 1.5 years when that technology came up, a lot of misunderstandings came up, a lot of bad documentation, partially bad reputation about the product was around. And this is just kind of a mission to explain what it's actually about, what's in the box as of today. You know, next week there's something happening in nearby LA which may change the game a little, but as of today we talk about shipping technology. And this is what I want to do with you, as long as the presenter does. That's the agenda for today. Sacrificed new specialized port number or so. No, not really. It's more like this, what I want to do with you. We go through a lot of architectural information, what the product is about. We have less than 75 now, but that's good. And as long as the internet won't break again, we do a demo on that as well to get you on a visionary impression of what it's actually about. So let's kick that off. And before we do, I would like to get you in the right mood what that is. The term of mobility that we want to talk about in the next couple of minutes, or let's say an hour. It's basically a definition thing. If we bring in the terminology of mobility and ask all of you what mobility actually is, and you do think about that for a while and ask other guys, talk to customers, to partners, to other companies that have implemented their mobility stuff, a lot of answers will come around with that. And there is something that may be called, let's say, the traditional thing of mobility. That's all the stuff that is around VPN technology, for example. It may be just remote accessing Windows stuff that you have virtualized with Citrix technologies. It's all these transformational thing that deals with making Windows apps more accessible on touch-enabled devices. This is part of what mobility can be for you and others. Of course, there's other stuff where mobility means more the management of devices. Of course, it not just only means managing an iPad, it means, for example, classic Windows stuff. That's also part of a mobility strategy. You have those devices. Windows still exists, laptops still exist. Not everybody just switches over to a tablet device just because it is. And of course, we have these non-Windows things. All the cool new devices that do other stuff. And specifically, we talk not only about the non-Windows platform, we talk about the non-Windows apps that run on those non-Windows platforms. So it's fully a non-Windows case, a non-Microsoft use case that happens with mobility, if you like. And if we take that as an example of what mobility can be, what is Citrix? Is that Citrix? Some of that, portions of that, all? Maybe nobody actually really knows. Because when you look at how Citrix goes out to the market, that's really different. Citrix comes up with two things that are really at two ends of that story. The marketing focus that you see about what Citrix does in the mobility space is more the thing that deals with non-Windows stuff. The MDX thing that comes along with Citrix mobility is anything that is non-Windows. It's not only that you have a device that is non-Windows, it's about the non-Windows application world. And this non-Windows application world, if you think about these things here, this is traditional client-server computing. Just as another version of that, a little bit more updated than that will be used with, let's say, Windows 3.11 or whatever, but it's just classic client-server computing. And the other side of that game is what Citrix does for long years. It's virtualizing Windows stuff in the data center, all these HDX things, so bringing a Windows abstracted to a certain remote device. Both of these things deal with mobility, and once again, they do more with that. They try to include in that picture a third game, which is called the web application layer. And once again, is it all of these? It's just portions of these. So it's a lot of things that you can do when you talk about Citrix mobility products. And if you remember, eventually, last year I started something that dealt with the technology that we had 1 year ago. That was the Cloud Gateway Express and Enterprise portfolio. That was the initial offering where mobility has started. And of course, we could do an update on that. It's a year later. We could talk about new technologies, new things that come up now. However, all you know, next week there's something happening nearby LA. And of course, there's things that happen to that technology that ships with that. And of course, as it's just shipping next week, it is under NDA, so we won't do that. That simply doesn't work. It's interesting, but we can't do that officially right now. So Brian did that a little bit too early from a schedule perspective. However, there's a lot of things left that stay with us, that even will stay with us next week and later. So we will do now the MDX version of what mobility is. That's the idea for today's session. So speaking of technology and products, this is the stack I want to go through with you. You will see there's no XenApp and no XenDesktop on the slide, and there won't be in that session. That is fully taken off the agenda. This is all the stuff beyond that that falls into different landscapes. So these products is the thing to talk about. And just to give you an idea about the complexity, and this is potentially the first slide that may be outdated next week, but this is today's packaging that's talking about licensing. If you think about these things as a productized thing and you want to buy them, we have a certain mix how to get them. We have the licensing for ShareFile. We have, as Citrix now has acquired the XenPrice stuff, the MDM edition from Xen Mobile, and we have the NetScaler, which has been there for years, and it has different flavors in terms of editions, different flavors in terms of the bandwidth that the device is entitled to bring to you. And you have, even for that device, client access licenses if you want to use advanced features of the box. And these other two things that came up with the mobility hype within Citrix, so the formerly called Cloud Gateway Enterprise stuff, and the new stuff with the own sandbox applications, Me at Work family that they have, they don't have a distinct licensing right now because Cloud Gateway is no longer there. You can't get that as an individual item. And Me at Work has never been sold in that manner. However, what they did as an intermediate thing, and that may be likely changed next week, they provide you a full stack license, which includes all the stuff, which also includes the access licensing thing. So in a nutshell, the only thing that you would need to acquire if you want to go through that stack is the Mobile Solutions bundle plus a respective NetScaler box. Anything else comes for free. They even put on top the ShareFile license, so you can get that in a single license and not need to seek out for each of the individual products. However, subject to change next week, maybe nobody really knows. That's the licensing part. There's also another important thing when it comes to mobility. That's the definition of what technology brings to us. This is the stack how Citrix divides itself into organizations. That's a three-tier approach where they think that their products fall into. It's the desktop virtualization space with all the stuff about desktop and app and Excalibur that is coming up. It's the networking thing, which is basically more or less the NetScaler and the WAN optimization business. And of course, all that cloud thing that deals with on-premise and off-premise data center service provider stuff and so. And if you ask Citrix about mobility and see all the news that come with that, they say, hey, and mobility is right here at that place. They pitch mobility as the first candidate that fills up the desktop virtualization tier that they run. And of course, it's partially true. If you think about mobility as remoting to Windows, of course, mobility in terms of remote accessing Windows on any platform and then managing that, that's more or less true. However, the picture before, which deals with that non-Windows stuff, more or less trends to be on the right-hand side. So just for me, just to give you the idea why I say that, we run a business with that. I own a division in the company that does that stuff called mobility. And I don't recruit my guys from the desktop virtualization space. The products that deal with mobility in the direct meaning of what Citrix provides in detail has nothing to do with XenApp and XenDesktop technology. It's a complete different topic. So you need to make sure that if you want to deep dive into that, what mobility means in terms of MDX, you should be more on the right-hand or right upper-hand side of that triangle if you're willing to allow that triangle. It's just Citrix definition of how they separate their organization. But this is effectively a vision of how the technology is run. And since we made that change and we've moved the people into that upper space, it works effectively better. Because if you don't do that, you run into this debate. You have no chance of getting the product out the door if your focus is just on using HDX technology in the data center and know nothing about the other stuff. Just to keep you aware of that potential discrepancy that comes with that. So once we got that, and I showed you the products that I want to talk about, let's do the deep dive in that, what I call the component puzzle. Let's see what we have in that box and lift the curtain, what comes with that. I will not specifically talk about NetScaler as a dedicated product because it is everywhere, as you will see in the next slides. So we focus on the other remaining candidates. So we start with the Zen Mobile. And I decided not to blow you away with screenshots from the mobility console. It's really nothing great because reporting on enrolled devices is really nothing that will shock you, that will not really emphasize you. However, I want to make you prepared of what the MDM thinking of Citrix is beyond that. Because you may remember, why MDM? Remember what Citrix does over the years. Everybody is saying we don't care about the devices. We want to have everywhere computing for any user. So our focus and our mission is to be responsible for the user. And we don't care about the device. That's the vision and the definition of what Citrix does for the last 10 years, for example. And I think that still applies. However, if you remember, last year, by starting of December, they acquired Zenprise for whatever reason. That doesn't match to each other in the first vision. However, if you think about the use cases and see mobile hardware as of an iPad, an Android tablet, the differentiation of the device and the user is no longer true. Those devices, the smartphones, the tablets, they are not used in a multi-personality way as other devices would be. The device is the user and vice versa. There is not even a concept in the user interface to differentiate users, except for the Surface potentially. All these other devices lock you in, and that is your device. They don't ask you for credentials and ask who's actually using that iPad. If my wife picks my iPad, it's still my iPad, and there's no personalization layer that asks for, hey, is it roaming around to another person? The device is the user. So at that point, having mobile device management makes sense if you take care of the user. That's just a different thing. And the question is, if I have MDM, how effective, how flexible is that what I get with MDM technology? And there comes a kind of a pitfall, because if we see our today's work, which primarily I think is Windows-based, we know about the fact that you can do anything with Windows. As a third-party vendor, you can apply any idea to Windows as long as you do that right on a code level. You have lots of things to do. However, when it comes to MDM on mobile units, it's differently, because the vendors, so specifically Apple and the Androids, they decide what interface MDM actually brings to you. That's really important to know, because if you blame MDM for being able to do certain things or being capable of doing certain things and being incapable of doing certain things in the wrong way or other than you would expect them, and you pitch the vendor for a feature enhancement, you need to make sure that they need to live into an existing operating system with a predefined interface that they cannot patch. So if Android decides to have a certain surface of configuration items, and Samsung, as one of the primary adopters of Android technology, decides to enhance that, that's a good thing. However, if you buy an HTC device which still runs Android, and you miss the Samsung enhancements, you can't blame the MDM vendor for being the one that needs to fill the gap, because from an operating system perspective, there's nothing to inject. And same discussion, the iOS MDM technology is different than the one in Android. So we live in a kind of a lockdown operating system world. So it's predefined how far and how effective MDM can be. So in a nutshell, you cannot inject a kernel driver into an Android operating system, not without jailbreak. And we typically talk about these classic consumer-based devices that not necessarily are jailbroken. That's the concept behind managing those devices. So in the history, when we then thought about MDM, it was always these lockdown things, locking devices, locking functionality, enforcing certain security restrictions, configuring settings and all that stuff. But that was just the perspective of the security engineer. So it was always driven by security guys to do certain things with mobile devices. Now that even these guys have started learning that there is an application world that lives on those mobile devices, and if you're willing to allow the terminology mobile application management, which is debatable what MAM actually is, it is really evolving to a little bit more flexible approach that MDM more becomes a config state and a config helper to get certain things on the devices right, and just to make them easier to use and to integrate them into your environment. Just as one of the easiest examples, if you want to allow your users access to your corporate network, and that corporate network Wi-Fi is hardly protected by 802.1x technology using certificates, you don't want to run around and provide all those users with certificate files to apply. You don't want to provide networking profiles so that they can get on the Wi-Fi. You want to automate that. You want to put that under the curtain. It's just a helper to onboard users to your systems. And this is a classic use case for MDM technology, because you configure the device, which is the user, and you make them just ready to access the network. And at that point, MDM is more like an automation tool for profiling. What is important to know at that point, if you decide to go for MDM technology and MDM config settings, each device that you pick up in the market space can be associated to just exactly one MDM manager. If that is occupied, the MDM layer, and we will talk about the layers later, the MDM layer is not available to you. And if the functionality you want to provide is only exposed at the MDM level of what a device can do, you're lost and screwed at that point. So there is a certain competition going on who owns the MDM layer, and potentially also debate even on a privately used device, the MD layer belongs to the user or it belongs to the company. That's really a hard thing. I think for me, as the European representative, we don't have that much of a problem with that private devices that might be MDM managed by the companies. We have so many customers that unlock their networks to onboard privately used mobile devices where the users don't actually care about the fact that they get an MDM agent. It's just a matter of a good definition of a policy, of a usage policy, and about the use case that the users want to do with those devices. But just keep in mind, it's just one MDM association that might be important in a later stage. But specifically for the features, so what can I do with MDM? The easiest way how you can approach that, as long as you use the iOS as an example, there's a tool that comes with iOS for free. It's the iPhone config utility or the iPad config utility, which does exactly this. It allows you to create profiles with settings. And this is exactly the initial surface and the initial interface that MDM can pick up to configure those units. And what you actually do with MDM is productizing this configuration stuff. You don't want to run around through all these devices and deploy profiles on a manual base. You just automate this stuff. You have a repository of config items and just deploy that out. So you make that more scalable, more easy. And what you get on top with that is all the stuff about an agent, about the silent operations, that all these things happen on the device without user interactions. Yet you have kind of a control structure about the applications that are allowed and that are not allowed. You've got the reporting and all that stuff. And what comes with that, and the most well-known candidates, those called geofencing stuff, is the automated reconfiguration of devices depending on where they are. So if you want to have an MDM policy that says when my users are roaming around in my organization and they enter the engineering space, the camera must be automatically turned off. That's nothing magically. It's just detecting the location of the device, reporting that back to the central unit, and automatically re-pushing new profiles out to the device silently, turning off the camera, and when you leave the forbidden zone, just removing the policy for the camera blocking. So it's nothing magical. It's just existing interface technology that is there, and nothing that the vendor needs to invent. What the vendor can do in the MDM space is making that as easy as possible for you as the admin to deploy and get nice reports and nice config consoles on that. But there's very few room to invent on the MDM layer if you really wanted this separation of device and application management. This is effectively what MDM is about. And I think it's not that surprising that potentially next week there will be new releases out for that layer. And this is why I don't blame you with the old classic GUI screenshots and that stuff. But ZenPrice, or formerly known ZenPrice, so so-called Zen Mobile MDM Edition, exactly picks up that place. And this is the same thing that other MDM vendors do in the same market space, like the Mobile Iron or whatever. They all rely on the same framework. They rely on the same stuff that Android and Google allow them to do, and there's no going beyond that. And if you blame somebody not doing certain settings for you, you first need to check if it's a matter of a platform or just a matter of the implementation from the specific MDM vendor. So sometimes they can't do anything for you. Thinking about MDM, let's pick up another candidate very quickly, just to make sure that it is done. It's the ShareFile thing, because it's not necessarily a must-have thing, but if you wanted to go for data housing on a mobile device, that may be an option for you. So quickly, let's discuss what that is about. ShareFile is kind of a file server access. That's the way how it is described and how it is felt by users. However, it's something fully different. It's of course something that is alternate to the CIFS use case, because everybody knows classic file server access requires VPN technology. The protocol is not really suited for wireless connections and remote access and stuff. However, if it's just a protocol debate, there wouldn't be a great need for ShareFile at all. And if you just have a Windows laptop and want to access data remotely, you don't need ShareFile for that. There exist thousands of other ways to get data on a Windows platform. However, if you've got a non-Windows device, the simplicity of a unified client technology and a unified protocol and a unified awareness of how you work with data, that makes sense. And at this point, ShareFile is not meant to be the brokering helper where you just send around email attachments more easily by just sending around links. It's really about storing data on a persistence manner. So what we do as a company, in my team, for example, we store all our config settings and documentations in a data repository that rooms with us, because we put that out into our ShareFile system, which gets automatically synced to all devices. So when I sneak into a specific customer situation, I don't need to grab my data before visiting the customer. I have them with me each and all the time, because the sync is enabled. I have all my stuff with me. It rooms around with all my team members. So it's really more the persistent data use case of ShareFile, not that sending around of attachments. That comes with that for free. That's something that they can do as well. But it's more the data at rest thing that we address with ShareFile in that space. And speaking of data at rest and data at transit, as the European representative, we have that problem which is called open cloud thing hosted somewhere in the US, exposed to Patriot Act system, Patriot Act hidden systems. And this is a different thing that comes with ShareFile. You can have that thing which is called a private on-premise storage zone, where the data is not stored in the cloud somewhere, not even in Ireland, which would be a good location for the Europeans. You can have that on-site with you, on your own systems. However, each time when you own a system and you want to have storage provided into an existing framework, you need to take care about those servers, because now you are the manager of the system. Even if it feels to you more like an anonymous system, it is a vital existing operating system, and a software on top of that needs to be maintained, that needs to be monitored, and that can be attacked. If you decide to have a storage location and put sensitive data on that box, you need to take care that nobody picks that data out of your environment. Because with ShareFile, it becomes really easy to use this stuff. So you need to take care about shielding and security of the things. ShareFile, in effect, is a Windows-based product. It's not a Linux-based software, not even in the cloud. It's really Windows technology that they use. And what they give to you is a Windows IIS-based web application. So you run a Windows server directly attached to the internet, or more or less directly attached to the internet. You've got firewalls in between, but natively, it's a secure protocol. So if you want to shield the data, you need to make sure about the thing which is called reverse proxying, because you need to take care about the fact that only data goes out to users that are allowed and entitled to use your data. So before we talk about all the client things, let's think about how the data center shall look like if you want to have a secure ShareFile solution in that mobility scenario. And it will look like this. This is the concept of how you will deploy ShareFile with your own storage services. That is called the so-called storage plane, where you get the software to deploy the storage node. The storage node resides within any location you choose, at a location at your choice, in a secure data center that you are able to manage and to audit. And of course, the storage plane needs an association to Citrix, because Citrix always remains the broker in that system. It doesn't matter if you completely cancel the cloud-based storage hosting with Citrix, the brokering always resides with them. And so there's a need that you and the so-called control plane have a shared trust with each other. You can change the shared trust keywords from time to time to make sure that nobody else can associate service to your account. However, that's the initial setup that you need. And you have this client on top of that. And just leave out for a while how users authenticate to ShareFile. At some point in time, we talk about the authenticated user that tries to grab a file from your system. This is that type of request. And before that, just to introduce, on the upper right-hand side, we place a NetScaler in front of the ShareFile because of one specific reason. We talk about SSL technology. You go to your storage plane service, fully encrypted. If you just place a standard firewall on top of the storage plane service, all the traffic is invisible to the firewall. However, you need to inspect what is inside the SSL packet. So you need to terminate the SSL layer on top before it comes to the ShareFile server to do some analytics on what the HTTP commands effectively do. So the client starts with that. It always will start with a broker. He requests for a file. He needs to request at the control plane because of the metadata is stored only there. So they know about the file's location on site with you, and the storage plane announces to you, the control plane announces to you, hey, in the next minutes there will be a user accessing a file with you. Be prepared for that. And just to be prepared, we define together a checksum, which is called the HMAC, which is just a verification string that identifies that specific access method. That lasts for a while. And the storage plane needs to store that with them. Oops, wrong direction, here we come. And stores that locally and sends back an approval to the control plane. At this point, the control plane sends a download link to the client. The download link now contains all the information to grab one specific file out from your ShareFile storage zone server. So the client will instantly flip over to you and ask for an HTTP access. And at this point, it is critical that this access is authorized, controlled, audited, and compared to the ShareFile protocol. There shouldn't be a script being able to enumerate directories on your file server, to test certain functionality just to check how the system behaves. The only request that may go through at that point shall be a validated request. And this is important because NetScaler simply reads that request out. That request includes the URI and the HMAC ID. And what it does, as a separate communication path, it asks the storage plane server if that type of request looks good to the software. It's not even the download request itself, it's just a pre-check, so like an on-the-fly check. Can you do something with that type of request? Does it make sense to you? Is the provided parameter set valid to retrieve a file from you? And this is something that the storage plane software pre-validates. And in case this is a successful answer, the story continues. In case it is a bad answer, the client is instantly bounced off. So we assume we have a good command in there. The request is sent truly to the server, which can now fetch the file from the backend system after validating the HMAC again, so getting the file, and sending that out to the client. And the difference to a standard deployment is this guy on top, because the steps 7, 8, and 9 require certain intelligence. Don't try to do that with the classic firewall. You need something that really inspects SSL, that really inspects the URLs, that really inspects the logic, and that knows about all these things. Comes in, for example, with a NetScaler for free. So that's the minimum foundation of securing your storage location, because if you want to have mobile experience and secure experience and good experience, you need to first secure the data in your at-rest location to make sure that nobody else can touch those files. Because if that gets a use case, having data mobile on devices, you need to make sure that those data is persistent and secured. Okay, going over to the major candidate. That was just really the warm-up around those things. The MDX, what is MDX about and what does Cloud Gateway? Cloud Gateway is also a mixture of things. They can provide a lot of stuff, and the core component that defines of what Cloud Gateway effectively is the App Store, which is represented by the AppController thing. And this AppController does everything non-Windows stuff. So if you think about the HDX use cases that we talked about previously, now AppController is there. If you talk about the MDX use case and all those non-Windows use cases on non-Windows platforms, that is something where AppController comes into play. And what it does, it can provide you links and access to certain things that appear in receiver. That's the best definition of what it can do. If you want to have receiver to display the Synapse and the desktop portions on top, that's storefront. That's a fully different game. That's nothing to do with AppController. However, AppController will become a resource in storefront at that point. And what it can do for you is really just defining roles and policies, who is entitled to use specific items, in which manner, how may they authenticate, how may they transfer. Is there something to wipe on a device because it was stolen? Is to log? It provides the workflow engine if you subscribe to new applications. And of course, it does all the reporting stuff. For AppController being that powerful in the web application world, it needs to be your identity broker. Because if you go into AppController and define that you have web applications in there, users will not only access the web application link, they want to get into the application. They want to get authenticated to the application. So AppController becomes the portion in that game that does the SSO, the single sign-on to the backend, because you need to assume that SSO no longer resides on the end-user device, like the old-fashioned password manager stuff, which will go away with us anyway. It is something where you need to authenticate web traffic. And to authenticate web traffic, there is something that AppController can do, which is called the SAML authentication. So let's go there and talk about SAML. SAML is important to AppController because it is the standard authentication framework that allows you to have fully independent web services on two other ends of the story that can communicate each other without any specific requirements, because it was designed to work with different vendors in an intermix scenario where you have different responsibilities, and it works with both browsers and non-browser use cases, and it is not relying on any DNS namespace. So all the things that come with cookie authentication that you might have in mind don't apply to that. SAML can work from scratch as long as the implementation is according to the standard, and it is a fully signed message, so it's even secure. Whatever travels between two partners in the authentication phase is fully secured, because if it is touched by a man-in-the-middle attack, it is detectable. So the downside of that, it is still an emergent technology. The 2.0 version is still more than 5 years old, and still it's being considered an emergent technology. Wondering why, and it's still a problem with some vendors to implement the SAML authentication interface without an additional charge. Some still think they want to earn money with that, just to get another revenue option. However, it is the definite preferred SSO method in AppController, and I'll show you why. This is the situation. You have got any type of application on the right-hand side that is SAML enabled, and you've got your user. And what you have is your internal system as part of the cloud gateway story that can do authentication. So it's the AppController in conjunction with an authenticator in front of it, which is the NetScaler. And now you've got three partners in that game. You've got the A, which is the application. You've got the B, which is the identity provider. And you've got the C, which is your user. And it actually works like this. You have the AppController, which is able to create signed messages. So he has a private key, of course, standard SSL technology. And you, as the administrator, need to go to your application and provide the public key portion just to configure, just to make the application, the service provider, being able to detect a perfectly signed message. Once you do that, you've got a trust relationship. The A, right-hand side above, trusts B. That's an important first step. Now your user comes in and wants to access this specific application. So the user does not directly go to the application. Instead, it goes to you, a predefined link that you can provide through AppController to your receiver. You need to authenticate the user. You can have any type of authentication you like, potentially a strong authentication with tokens and whatever. And AppController just verifies this entitlement to your Active Directory. And as it knows how the login procedure in terms of SAML works with the external system, it can create a login token. At that point, your AppController trusts the user. And because of the mechanism how SAML is defined, you've got a transitivity between AB and BC. This is why you now can send over the login, which is nothing more like a textual information that can be sent through a browser, which is a signed information, so it cannot be tampered upon travel. And that can be validated by the right-hand side service provider. And with that trust, that system is able to log in the user silently because that authentication is validated. That assertion contains, for example, the username as the identity criteria, and you get an instant login. If somebody in the way of that travel tempers the message or something else goes wrong in the system, that system will send the user back as a redirect to the original location just to re-authenticate. It will simply bounce the user. That's the way how SAML is meant to be used, and that's the way how web applications come to life in an MDX scenario. That applies both to internal and external applications. However, it is more likely that the external applications will be the ones that will get converted first, whereas the internal ones will still be used with Kerberos or other things. So that's the web thing. Going deeper, leaving the web layer, going to the application world. So we leave the things that happen in the browser of your choice, but instead happen on a proprietary application that is programmed and individualized for a specific mobile operating system, let's say an iOS system. That's exactly the thing where MDX comes into play. That's the true core component of what mobility on non-Windows platform means for Citrix. We have, I think it's a hard terminology. Eventually it's debatable, but it's kind of a partial virtualization option for mobile OS. It is what is called the sandboxing and containerization thing, in conjunction with a centralized control about these containers. So you have your App Store capability. You can provide apps out to the user. You have a policy how these applications behave, and you've got the versioning and update mechanism on top of that. However, as I said, the same with MDM. If you want to do those things on a mobile device that is locked down by default because of the operating system, it is not that easy just to inject something and make something happen as a sandbox. You need to do some preparations to the device to instantiate a sandbox and a container on that. Before we do that, let's have a look at what the containers are with Citrix. We have 3 categories that MDX can do then. The first thing is the vault. It's nothing more than, or nothing more is a great thing, it's really effectively the encrypted store that you make sure whatever data is saved on the mobile device is not natively stored on the mobile OS file system, which could be grabbed later using jailbreaking technologies. It is in a container format that is pre-encrypted and where the key is not under control of the user, but instead stored centrally with you. So it's about encrypting and defining policies who is able to do certain things with data. Both meant for the individual application as well as when applications talk to each other. So they need to make sure that these data can travel between apps. Talking about things that go between apps, there's the inter-app communication in MDX. That makes sure that you have got not only a sandbox A and a sandbox B, but instead also the option of having 2 applications talk to each other. As you may know, if you've got different products, like saying an email client plus a file viewer, it wouldn't be much of a sense if the file viewer would be fully isolated and the mail client would be fully isolated if you then need to transfer over an attachment to the viewer. So that sandbox definition needs to be adjustable. And this is where MDX inter-app comes into play. This is also for mail links, for web links, and all that stuff that interact with other applications. You know from iOS those open-in things. And it's about restricting and controlling this open-in user interface. And the third thing, which is also important, is about how to access your corporate resources. Prior to those technologies, if you would invent a native application for an iOS device, for example, you would need to take care about the transport, about the authentication. You need to provide a web broker on the internet so that the application can transfer and retrieve data from your data center. Could be proprietary and whatever, however, you need to do some coding. And that behavior of getting to data and retrieving data eventually is different if you're in-house in your corporate network, and it works other if you're on the road. So you've got to take care about these rooming scenarios as well. The idea of MDX access is to code the application once, with the idea in mind that you always have corporate access, so you don't have to create specific brokers, authentication mechanisms and whatever. You just say the application can work like a LAN-like connection to a specific backend resource and get data. And if the application is mobilized and leaving our corporate network, used somewhere on the road, we take care automatically under the curtain to establish a VPN connection to the corporate internet and put the traffic from that application into the tunnel so that the application simply doesn't know about the difference. That's the idea, and the terminology that is most often heard in that context is micro VPN. It's debatable how micro a VPN really is in that case, but it is the meaning that the encrypted tunnel can only be used by entitled applications, which is fairly different to a classic VPN client that you would deploy on an iOS device. Because at that point, when the VPN comes up, it unlocks the whole device to access your data center with all the applications, whereas the micro VPN is limited to the MDX layer, and that's the main difference why the micro terminology comes into play there. Just to give you a visual impression of how that works like. The entitlement for MDX, in case I didn't say that before, the runtime is always the receiver. So MDX comes to a mobile device automatically without a specific UI by installing receiver. So when you drop on receiver on iOS or Android, you got MDX automatically. Even if you just use HDX scenarios, the MDX portion is always there. That's part of receiver. So when receiver is there, it will connect to your centralized data center and will authenticate the user and will get certain policies that deal with these three applications displayed on the left-hand side. So these policies can be the same things that you know from the MDM layer or could be more. And that depends on how far the operating system is open to certain restrictions. So for iOS, the feature set is the most complete so far. Android lags a little behind, and some of these examples would be disabling iCloud functionality for a specific app or disabling the camera on the fly for a specific app. And with these policies, you firstly instantiate the configuration of the vault, so how data is stored on the device, how it is accessed by users. And in the second phase, you also define how applications may interact between each other. So assuming that you've got something from application on the left-hand side that needs to be opened in on the right-hand side, for example, that can be either allowed or denied. That's one of the things that interop is about. If all these applications create local data, those data is worthless without being sent anywhere in your data center. So we need to talk about the traveling from the left-hand side to the right-hand side in your data center. So having a look at that, you have the authentication already. The receiver has logged you in. And of course, within the logon, you also not only have gotten the MDX policies for the behavior, you also have gotten the MDX policies for the networking thing. So the tunnel definition, the access control lists, which application is entitled to use what. So all the gateway technology is prepared to take an encrypted tunnel. And this is the thing where applications may be allowed to directly send data into the network in your corporate environment or not. That's the MDX access technology, called micro VPN. So let's go back one step after showing the functionality, thinking about how complex it can be to get that onto a device, and why mobile operating systems are different than everything that we know from Windows. With Windows, we are always used to know that we just need to have kind of a kernel driver and reuse the existing application. That's all the things how sandboxing, application streaming, even the Vault technology that exists for Windows, all that stuff, antivirus, and all these things work on the kernel level layer with unmodified applications. They are not aware of the fact that they are modified or that they have tempered access paths. On the mobile OS, you cannot touch the kernel. Matter of fact, you can't do. However, you need to inject something, and any app that you want to deploy onto those devices must be signed. So even if you want to patch an application, you need to make sure that it gets signed afterwards. Otherwise, the mobile device will not execute that application anymore. So it's way harder to establish a containerization layer. And that's the reason why Citrix goes that way. They select the receiver as the candidate of carrying out an MDX framework, which is worthless by itself because there's no consumer for that. And to have a consumer for that framework, the apps must be patched. So let's think about how those apps effectively work. When they get programmed, they look like this. There's an app, there's an operating system. And they do certain things. Certain things deal with the UI. They are as is. And they do certain things that may be critical to you to get it more secure, more controlled, and eventually more restricted. And classically, we talk about networking, files, clipboard. These are these standard candidates that you may easily think of. What we need to have is an injection at these access paths that all the applications use by default. By just coding the app, you use these, let's say, 4 channels. And we need to touch these 3 channels and do something different. We need to inject something as a helper, as a helper functionality that redirects those calls to the framework. Remember, framework is receiver. And receiver may lead them back to the mobile OS or may block those calls, depending on what the policy condition is. And to do that, you have 2 different options. First thing is you have an existing pre-compiled application where you've got the package. That's an important thing. You've got the package. And when you got the package, you can apply packages, can apply patches to those packages and re-sign the package so that the application is still valid. The other option is to give the developer an SDK and pre-compile its application internally. So in both cases, you will have the way that the upper 3 channels in the blue rectangle get intercepted at some point. So the first one is called wrapping. The second one is really developing for that technology. I think the most applicable use case that we see today is wrapping. I don't see any specific apps that come pre-compiled except for those that have been created by Citrix themselves. And that's the way how the story works. And that is much more than just redirecting a single call. The idea is to find all the operating system calls in the application that deal with these forbidden channels, to replace them, to move them out to the framework and deal with them. And this looks easy on the top level layer. If we just take out the networking thing and drill that down, it could look like this. We still have the application. We have networking things that the application wants to do. And we have always receiver, netscaler, corporate internet, and the framework, aka receiver. And we need to make sure that here is a network interception being created. And think about network. You have got more than just the network. It is TCP protocol. It is UDP protocol. It's a SOX proxy. It is HTTP access. So many incarnations of what network access may be. And what happens there, you have got an authentication as before. You've got a ticket to that framework, and that framework establishes the tunnel. That's the easy portion, because it's just receiver. It's worthless unless anybody talks to that routine. And to get that done, that interception takes place at the application logic like this. You've got the HTTP call from an application, which gets redirected into the framework and gets redirected to the tunneler library. The tunneler library is nothing else than just a gigantic proxy listener on the receiver that just takes any web request and decides if it is to be sent to the corporate internet or to send to the internet itself, depending on the policies. And the other candidates work differently, and they go through the same library. And this is the way how dynamically one application can simultaneously access an intranet and an extranet resource without being programmed for that use case. As I said, if you patch an application, you need to do something with the application to get it running. We talk about runtime requirements. If you need to patch those applications, and you need to have the raw application package, and you don't, and you need to have that package itself. You just need to. It's not. Let me start different. It's not enough to know that there is an app out in the store and to retrieve the app and do something with that. That doesn't work. What is in the store is the runtime version of the app. The raw package is way differently, and that means you need to go to the specific vendor if it is a third-party app, or if it is an in-house developed application, you've got the package individually available by default. And if you can't make sure that you get the raw package, the application will not be MDX aware. So if you think about that gigantic MDX use case and you can't get the raw package, it will not work. It will not work with any vendor, by the way, but that's the most important criteria of getting MDX to run. You need the raw package. And when you have the raw package, you need to apply for a commercial signing certificate. So you are going to be an application developer. You need to go for the Apple and for the Google guys and request for a signing certificate. It's not the end of the world. For Apple, it's just these $400 per year to get the signing cert. But you need to have that because an unsigned application will not run. And once you have that signing certificate, you also require a Mac-based workstation to do the signing, which for some customers is kind of a message from hell because they are Windows-based shops just want to do MDX stuff. And just to get that running, they needed an Apple workstation to do the signing. It's different per geo. It's different depending on the enthusiasm of IT guys. However, it's a matter of fact, you need an Apple to sign the apps even if you're in a Windows shop. That's just technology. Do that with open eyes and everything is good. If that comes as a surprise message, the debate goes differently. We talked about applications, and we talked about the complexity of getting the raw package. And if you just want to do some MDX from scratch, the ultimate expectation is that the vendor ships you MDX applications on top of that. And that is why Me at Work comes into play. Citrix, after inventing the MDX itself, has learned that they need to provide applications. So Me at Work is nothing else than just a web browser, an email application, a calendar application, so anything that falls into PIM and other stuff. And it's there because of a very simple reason. You need to start somewhere. If you just deploy an MDX framework without any application, you will never have a use case. So this is where the Me at Work comes from. And of course, that's not just for laughing. There is a market space already. Exciter and God Technologies are there providing those apps in a similar manner. The difference between those and the Citrix is that with that MDX approach, potentially Citrix is widely more open to your own applications that you may have, that you buy in a later time. If you just focus on that emailing thing, the MDX looks like a gigantic overhead. However, it's the foundation to make the system much more feature complete. And it comes as the raw application package. You still need to sign. I did not have a chance until today to find out why the applications are not pre-signed by them. It might be because of legal things, because it wouldn't be a problem to get the application signed out through the door, but then they would carry the Citrix certificate. And it might be because of Apple, because at that point they would be prepared for the official store. That's just the assumption of that. You know about that, Jack?
Well, I was going to ask you if you knew the answer to this question, but I
yeah.
believe some part of the frameworks, the MDX inter-app
yeah.
framework that's executed, I believe requires the separate application packages to be signed with the same certificate to be able to access certain information directly app to app, and you know, because those go other channels than the typical app to app inter-process communication channels that are available to all apps. I believe that may be why. So if it was signed by the Apple App Store, that Citrix mail app, then it would not be able to access certain parts of the MDX framework.
Well, I have a different feeling on that. However, it is really unanswered at that point, and nobody at Citrix is willing to give the official answer on that. My personal belief is it's a legal restriction. Technology-wise, the framework can sign everything. So if there's a secret call, even that framework wouldn't catch that. So if they could run it themselves. I don't know. That's just an interesting thing. If you go for Me at Work, you still have to do the signing. That's a different thing. I don't know. Eventually we'll find out next week. I don't know. I tried to get that answer. I didn't get an official one. So just to see how it actually works, it is similar like the other applications. We've got the same framework. We've got the receiver. We've got the controller. We've got strong authentication. And that's the interesting portion of secure email. Classic email is pretty much hard to protect with, let's say, an RSA OTP token. With that frameworks where receiver does the authentication in front before using the apps themselves and tunnels networks access through itself, it is way easier to inject SMS tokens, OTP from RSA, certificates and whatever, because everything that these apps need in terms of authentication is done at the receiver level. So you have the initial phase where you as the end user authenticate and receiver to your environment. You get validated against your Active Directory, matter of fact. And of course, you can inject additional security by strong authentication. And then the story goes like this. You've got web applications being either internally or externally. The internal ones, of course, more or less are bound to Windows worlds in most cases. So we talk about Active Directory authentication. And the outside apps come back to what I did a few slides before, talking about the SAML thing. They get authenticated with a different mechanism. However, it is the same browser, the same user experience, and the same expectation just to click on a link and being logged in and still being fully protected and protecting both the internal and the external applications, for example, with strong security. So work and web comes exactly in that play. It reuses the encrypted channel into the network and also, of course, can connect to the outside internet and can launch applications from any shortcut that you provide to that browser. Matter of fact, the browser itself is just an umbrella. The WebKit on iOS and Android is the WebKit, so there's nothing specifically to invent as a browser. But it is the umbrella that is entitled to use MDX. That's the important thing. This is why there is a line to the receiver. And when it comes to email, it is an exchange story only so far. I think for most users, that is fine enough. There's the work mail, which does the same thing. And at this point, it becomes interesting that work mail and work web share the same sandbox, of course. So if there's things to be inter-application stuff between them, it is automatically unlocked. And if you've got own applications that you add to that, you've got a sandbox that can become quite larger than this. So this is the way where that is different from what other vendors do if they just provide the browsing and mail solution. That's typically a locked-in solution with their applications. From the Citrix perspective, with that MDX layer, which automatically extends to other applications. There's no preparation that you need to take care of except for signing the app and sending that through the wrapping tool. You can automatically enrich the scenario how you use those technologies. And as we talked so much about these access methods, I think it's much easier to show than to guess how that could work like. So let me quickly bring up something like this guy. Where are we? So hopefully Demo God will be with us. Here we come. Looks like an iPad. It can access the internet because that's just Google Chrome. Nothing spectacular at that place. However, we could do something different and go to receiver. So I haven't been a while in the company, so let me quickly log in here. Oops. Sorry for that, because you don't want to have my PIN. Okay, so back again. Huh? I have dual screen from an iPad. Let me quickly do that differently. It's there again. Okay, I don't know why. This is receiver. It still stands at the same place, so we continue here. Yeah. Okay. Okay, you know what the demo guide does? We will restart all the stuff from scratch. I have no clue why we have this artifacts in here. Sorry, guys. Let me quickly check if it can continue. Okay. Is there somebody that blew up the network except for me? Oh, this is wrong. Ah, okay. Say hooray, please. Okay. What I did in the background, I authenticated. Just believe that when I now refresh the application list, I'm connected to the corporate internet. I already have deployed some of the apps on the receiver. The work web, which is on the left-hand upper portion, is already installed. I already add now the work mail product. So it ultimately will fetch that from your internal store. This is what the Enterprise App Store means. So in the background, it will start now downloading the app. While it does that, we will have a short look on the work web application. You can start it either from receiver or directly from the Springboard, doesn't matter. If the application is started directly from Springboard, it will call back to the receiver it's running and see for its entitlement and so there may be flipping screens. But in the end, you will receive that browser view. And of course, as work web is unrestricted, you can go to Google. It's no surprise at that point. However, as it is an MDX and it has an enabled policy to use internal resources, you can go to those guy, which is an internal web server, without doing anything manually. It's just the IIS start page, so nothing spectacular to expect here. The bandwidth is pretty cumbersome, but there is IIS. So in different tabs, side by side, you have got the external and the internal usage scenario. So you can travel between internal and external resources without breaking the user experience, without forcing anybody to use a different browser. And just to prove that the tunnel is not exposed to the system, we go to Chrome, which also can do Google, no surprise. But it can't do this guy. Okay. You see it as remembered. That will time out. Will last a while, but there won't be any display. Whereas the other candidate instantly will display these two tabs. So as users shouldn't navigate to those resources manually, we can provide them with resource links in receiver, like SharePoint. Upper right-hand side, I've got a SharePoint link in here. I could type that manually in the same browser. That's just the luxury of having a shortcut in receiver, which ultimately will bring up the browser, as you see here. Starts a third tab. And as you are already authenticated to your backend system and the traffic goes through, the gateway will take care of your identity and will lock you in with your personality. If you go to an external resource, they will take care of the same mechanism. I have an external resource, which is ShareFile. And where the display doesn't sync. Hello? OK. Wow. Somebody eats up CPU here, right? Yeah? I will tap that anyway. A little bit flickering. We got back a fourth tab. This is the ShareFile link. And that does SAML authentication to the ShareFile system. So you've got the external and the internal resources in a single tab. When the screen is done, you will see the same as I do already, which is the, OK. Oh, gosh. Okay.
To something in Google Docs and you pulled in a document, is that then storing it within your work area?
Yeah, if you've got a link from Google Docs that is opened by that browser and you've got a download, that is stored by the MDX Vault. So you can't access that from outside this browser. So it's ultimately fully encrypted. So the screen display doesn't like me today. Don't know why. It was much better in the preparational phase. What I would like to show you, let me quickly check if we can get that running. Tentatively, it will not work. There's something eating up CPU here. I don't know why. Okay. Maybe we can fix that in the end of the show, but just to first get that completed. Let's see if we can finish this. OK. Let's see if we can get that. PowerPoint is still fine. Putting that together, we saw just aspects. As I said, we have kind of a new architecture that has layers inside. The layers are different than that what we know from Windows, but it still has. That is just an offering. It's just the beta version. It's nothing official. It's just the mindset that I have on how that technology works. We have the data center side. So we have the configuration layer, and we have the gateway services that are needed to connect your applications. And we have the mobile side, which today is a little bit, what's under development is a term that fits best, I think. We have a certain competition between the device management and the data management layer. Prior to the evolution of what MDX is today, data management resided in the device management layer. It has now lifted off a little bit higher. The problem is that some of the aspects that make up data management still reside on the bottom, and only some of them have been lifted up. But let's first see the left-hand side. We have the orchestration, authorization. We have all the definitions and all that stuff in there, which also includes licensing and versioning, storing the keys that make up the data management side. And we have the connect to the outside world, which primarily provides networking services. And the consumer side, as of today, still carries on with a certificate for the initial security stuff, type of plugins, and of course the networking layer, which is very hard to get that out of the device vision, because the Windows will not allow that move that easily. But you have something that exists above that, and that is, in first look, fully independent if MDM is populated or not. You've got the VPN technology, or the control mechanisms for VPN technology, and you've got the encryption layer and the authentication and the process control stuff, which can reside above MDM, assuming that the application layer, which sits on top of that, was adopted to the existence of data management functionality. This is why we need to patch and resign applications for getting that to work. And so we have the Citrix starting with applications in there. The most obvious wish list is to have Citrix providing 20 of those apps, viewers, editors, whatever stuff, and not just only a mail client as a starting candidate. Nobody knows what will be next week, but this is obviously another market space to be populated with options, and there's really room for improvement in even that what ships today. And if we want to go with that to our higher level management and talk to them, we want to redefine our mobility solution. We need to start with something less technical, but still distinct enough to define what we want to do. We have clients, we have an access layer, we have an app store, which is comprised of many, many more items because that incorporates both the HDX and the MDX technology in a single diagram. And we have the application resources in the backend. This is the idea how to go forward with the mobility. And for the technical guys amongst us, this is the more satisfying vision, which is much more complex. These are the individual components and how they relate to each other. So this is actually the mobility stack as itself. And you need to decide if that is too complex to go for that, if that is really remoting Citrix or remoting something else. As I said in the introduction, MDX and all that hype around mobility is non-Windows business. It's something fully different to what centralized Windows application virtualization traditionally will do. And we all need to find out if that really lifts up on the mobile devices to being consumed as another application world. There is a long way to go there, I think. And with that, as I already tried to overrun that session, we could try if the mail app still does its job. I would try a single shot on the AirPlay again. And if it doesn't, we just quit from there instantly. Okay. You see the download is completed. Tap to install on the work mail. What you like to install? Yes, I want. So it's classic application deployment on the Springboard, as you know that. Installing, blah, blah, blah. Almost done. Yep. You see I've got one new email. Just to make sure receiver reflects the installation thing on the left-hand side. You can either start from here or from Springboard, doesn't matter. As this is the first installation, we need to go through the personalization thing. Let me quickly do that. Okay. Sometimes I can type my passwords correctly. So this is the connect to the demo mailbox. And just as an outtake for all of you. Oops, okay. Oh, that wasn't good. That's better. Just to make sure that this is really something working, we go here, select this guy. And if I minimize him, you see the blue bar indicating a new email. So I tap that down. You see the red one indication on the application. And if I send you a new guy, please, you see a 2. You see the headline on top. Oops. So should be us here. And with that, I'm about to say, thank you. We're done.